Hi, everyone. Welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Delighted to be talking a second time on this episode with author, creator Jonathan Roth. Jonathan, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
So great to have you back. Great to see you. And I was recently perusing NetGalley, which is something that I often do to try to keep up with what's coming and what's out, and happened to notice that you have another book that is on the way, I believe, in just about a month and a half in early October.
All right. Actually, I have a month. I have a book in 2 weeks, and then one in like a month and a half. So
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
I can talk about them both.
Yeah,
They're related and not. So
fantastic. Well, that gets right to my first question, which is what is new? What is happening in your creating?
um, well, let me share the first book first.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you haven't. I don't think you've seen it. I think you saw Rover and Speck 3, right? This one.
Mm-hmm.
So I have my first picture book coming out in 2 weeks.
Nice. Nice.
It's my first nonfiction. It's a very serious book. You can tell because it has the word
Yes.
underwear in the title. But no, it is an actual true story, and it's related to Rover and Speck in that it's partly about a rover and things that happen on Mars. But
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
this is a again, it's a true story. Do you remember remember 2020, mid 2020? What were we all thinking of?
Yes, yeah.
But NASA was going on as planned, and they sent a what would become the fifth rover to Mars. Like I like to follow these rovers that like the real ones. That's kind of how Rover and Spec were inspired, but it's all
Hmm.
the real ones. So they sent one up, during the pandemic, and it's about 6 months to get to Mars. So when it landed there, at that point I was, I'm a teacher, elementary school art teacher, and we were all on. I was teaching on Zoom, and I had a club called Astro Club. We had to have like little extracurricular clubs. So we were watching Perseverance land, and I mean we were watching the JPL engineers, because you can't use live footage, but you could watch them, and we were all cheering, and it was kind of a bright spot in those times.
Yeah.
What NASA didn't tell at the time that they had Perseverance was carrying a little 4 pound experimental rotorcraft, a little helicopter underneath it, and then quietly deployed it, and they backed Perseverance up, and so then on the Martian surface was this little. This is a little smaller, the original, but the original is only about the wingspan is like 4 feet and it weighs about 4 pounds.
Oh,
Called
wow.
Ingenuity.
Uh-huh.
And if this flew successfully by remote control, it would be the first object to fly on another planet, which is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
So they quietly, released about that. Then they released another fact about it, which is that a piece of the Wright brothers' original airplane wing, like the cloth, was actually taped to a cable underneath it.
Ah,
And it did fly in April of 2021. And it ended up flying for about 72 flights over a couple of years. That's and a few months ago, one of the propellers broke, so it's now just sitting there on Mars for the rest of the time. I don't know. But the minute I heard that it had part of the Wright brothers wing cloth on it, like I had instant inspiration for a book. I knew I wanted to tell a story about it. Um, Not just because of that, because I'm near what I live right outside Washington D.C. So I go to the. Have you ever been to the Air and Space Museum?
I have not. I would love to go
Oh,
sometime.
you've got to come and see because it has the original Wright Flyer in the downtown location, and there's also I was always very amazed because you go in there and everyone's looking at the Wright Flyer, and the it's the original White Flyer, but the cloth on the wing is actually replica.
Mm.
So because the original got all, I didn't know it was at the time, but it got all printed up and moldy, and Orville eventually cut it into little pieces. Now, another Ohio aviator named Neil Armstrong, you heard of him?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
He,
Think
he
so,
took
yeah.
he took one of those pieces all the way to the moon, and that little piece is on a wall at the Air and Space Museum. And I always thought that is like the coolest, almost the coolest object, even more so than the rockets, because literally connects the first airplane with the first moon landing.
That's cool. Very
So that's
cool.
that's what this book is about. And it kind of ties into comics. Like the first drafts I did, like I use it on the usual style because I do drawing. Um, like it's part historic photographs,
Mm-hmm.
right? The Wright brothers, like real trains and stuff. But I drew. Okay, I don't know if you can tell, but those are drawings
Yeah.
that I did of the Wright brothers and stuff.
Cool,
And then I
cool.
used NASA photographs. Originally, original one, it was more comics format.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's much. Oh, you can see like this one has kind of like a panel format.
Yeah.
So a little of that survived, but it goes to the editing process and all that. So this takes it through all the way to the Mars, flight of some ingenuity. So that's my picture book that's coming out soon.
Nice. You said first picture book.
It's my first actual picture book, even though I started like years and years ago. That's what I wanted to do, picture books.
Mm-hmm.
And I started, that's how I taught myself like, the craft and the industry. And I started submitting picture books, but those didn't sell. I mean, they were pretty bad. I was a beginner. Um, then my first books then I tried middle grade novels. Then the first
Mm-hmm.
thing that actually sold was chapter books, which was like the Beep and Bob chapter book series, which
Mm-hmm.
is about a kid who goes to school in space. So I kind of got pegged as a space guy because then my second series was the Rover and Speck graphic novel series.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the one that's coming out. I don't actually have a pre-release copy. Like book two, I think we talked about book one maybe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This was on kind of a rocky world, like Mars. Then book two was on a watery world.
Mm-hmm.
So for book three, I wanted to challenge myself. And so one of my inspirations growing up, I like to show kids um, for like today I was at a library and I show slides and everything. And I show them like when I was a kid, some of the things that inspired me along this line that got me thinking about this stuff. One thing I show them is like the original, like the first pictures from Mars that were taken by a lander, Viking back in 1976. I was just a little
Yeah.
kid, but I was on the front page of the newspaper, and I thought it was so cool and everything. So I try to show them some real science that inspired me. But then I also introduced them to this movie that came out the following summer. It was like the science fiction genre film. I figured they never heard of it, but it was called Star Wars.
Oh, right, right, right. I've heard of that somewhere. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, surprisingly, they've heard of it. And actually, but I do show them actually this book. I don't know if you knew, but even though it was conceived as a movie, they made a novelization of it about a few
Nice.
months before to try to get kids into it.
Mm-hmm.
And like I saw it in the drugstore, as we call them then. And, I still have it. It's like one. This is the first Star Wars. It's actually the first piece of Star Wars merchandise that existed,
Wow.
and it's using concept art.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if the actors were in it yet. And it says by George Lucas, but it was actually ghostwritten by Alan Dean Foster.
Nice, nice.
So yeah. So the kids are all like, "Oh yeah, Star Wars," and then but, I tell them that I liked, in particular, I'm not such a Star Wars fan. I love the early Star Wars, but
Mm-hmm.
the new ones. But I was a fan of
Yes, the
like the
droids.
humor, and so Rover and Speck was I could kind of take it back all the way to like
Mm-hmm.
these two, and also my love of real rovers and landers and all that kind of stuff. Um, oh, and then so book three, which you've seen, takes place on Gas Giant. So I
Mm-hmm.
thought Rocky World, Water World, and then what? And Gas Giant. That sounds like like Jupiter and Saturn and Neptune and Uranus are examples of gas giants, which is kind of an odd place to think of setting a story because they are literally just layers of like turbulent gas,
Mm-hmm.
as deep as it goes. So how do you set a story there? But another book I introduced Joe kids or
Nice.
you ever hear of this one?
Uh-huh.
So when I was in high school, like this was a big influence on me. Like this came out and the TV show came out, and again, I was just kind of blown away by it. But So Carl Sagan and a physicist friend of his came up with this idea that so in a gas giant like Jupiter, the top layers are very turbulent and cold.
Hmm.
And the deeper you go, if you go really deep, it's like super hot. I think Jupiter was maybe even like a failed sun. But somewhere in the middle, so it goes from cold to hot, and somewhere in the middle would be what they call a Goldilocks zone, which is like a temperate layer of clouds. And they kind of hypothesized like there could be like floating little creatures
Oh,
in,
cool.
in those temperate layers. So again, just a, I mean, probably not, but that's what they do. They speculate about all that. So I thought, wow, I'm gonna pay homage to that, and also kind of a unique place to maybe set a story. So Rover and Speck kind of parachute um out of their spaceship, and then they sink through the layers till they get kind of to the middle, and to start kind of floating around there, and then they eventually discover life and have a little adventure and all that.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. I love the thought process that you put into it. There's obviously a research process that comes with this too.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I noticed you have scientific facts as you go through the books as well.
Right. Yeah, I originally planned those kind of as back matter, but the editor really wanted them as, yeah, just kind of sprinkled through
Hmm.
like as you go, just kind of for a curricular connection. Um, yes, there's probably about like I think like 9 or 10 like fun science facts sprinkled throughout each book.
Yeah. What's the creative process like to sort of unfold a series that way?
Well, when this sold, it was sold as a 3 book series. So I think I kind of laid out. I can't remember if I did have book 3 planned out at that point, but yeah, it was just kind of my usual process where I don't know most of the like graphic novelists you talk to. I mean, we all have different process and stuff, but I actually do all the writing first, which I think might be a little on the odd side, just to totally like do the script, and then I start laying out some panels and write sketches and all that.
Oh, yeah. Well, also curious about anything in your process that changed working on the picture book versus the graphic novel.
Well, probably the biggest change, or the thing about the picture book was, well, the style, like the drawing style, is more realistic.
Hmm.
So I guess I was legit, like the parts that I drew. Well, they're both cartoony, like the little cloth I personify. They're cartoony and realistic. But I also used a lot of source photographs in that one. Um, Actually, in Rover and Speck, I do use a few source photographs. In fact, that ingenuity, like I
Mm,
do actually make reference to that. That was right when it happened. So this might be actually the first reference in a children's book to ingenuity, and I'll have maybe the first children's book about it. So that's where I'm saying there's connections between the two, even though they're kind of different. But using photographs, like using actual source photographs, I mean, I'm lucky my agent has a lot of experience in getting photo permissions. And I'm
mhm.
also lucky that pretty much all the photos in it um, were from NASA or the Air and Space Museum, or like, Wright brothers, old photos that are, so pretty much everything's public domain. So it was pretty easy to get, but it was that was kind of the biggest headache of
Uh,
that book.
yeah. Well, you bring the artistic sensibility, you bring kind of the science aspect to it as well. Do you have plans to continue to include science in your work, or are you going to explore different worlds, so to speak?
Yeah, I do have other ideas, believe it or not. I mean, all my published books now have like a space theme or whatever, but I guess I do have a science interest, and um, but I'm working on two. I don't have anything under contract right now, but I'm working on a graphic novel idea that my agent likes that involves dinosaurs.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, but I guess that has kind of a science, or and I just submitted a picture book that has to do with that's about some aspect of the life of Leonardo da Vinci. So,
Nice.
so focusing on art as opposed to any space stuff, no space stuff at all, even though obviously there is a connection with Da Vinci. There's always a connection with science.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
and flight even. So it all kind of ties together.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned Carl Sagan. Were you a science fiction reader growing up as well?
Yeah, I mean, my first novels, like when I was a kid, keep dating myself, but you go into a mall and there would be a B. Dalton and a Walden books.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So, I mean, I loved bookstores as a kid, and I mean, there were books. I grew up in Detroit, and of course, there were like in what we call indie bookstores now. But you go to the mall, and there were many kids' books at that time. Even YA wasn't really much of a category. So, if you're interested in kind of books that have like weird creatures or look kind of like almost kid-like, you would go to the science fiction. I don't even know if they called it fantasy, maybe science fiction fantasy. Where they had everything from like Isaac Asimov to Tolkien and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I guess I got into. I mean, that was just kind of the choices, um, the reading choices when I was young was like comic books were all superheroes pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that was I read comic books. I read mostly superhero comic books and like some Richie Rich, those kind of things. Um, I was into uh, newspaper comics, Peanuts and all that stuff. And then whatever I guess they had at school, but the books I was choosing was mostly suddenly like adult science fiction,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which I did not, especially in my early teens, I did not get most, like some of that's very hard sci-fi. It's pretty sophisticated, and no, it was just kind of fun to try to figure out. So I guess I was a science fiction fan. But I did fall in love with Tolkien when I started also reading
Definitely.
like fantasy and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you mentioned you had a three-book plan for Rover and Speck. Will Rover and Speck live on, or will that be yet to be determined?
Yet to be determined. I think the publisher's waiting now that they're going to be 3 books out to kind of see how they do and
Mm-hmm.
see what my schedule's like and all that kind of stuff. So I'm definitely open to doing more. Um, but again, I have other things in the works. Um, if this dinosaur thing takes off, that would be fun too.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
always have a lot of ideas. It's like ideas aren't the problem. It's just like finding the time to actually sit at in a chair and get the drawing done.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned you're a teacher and the school year's starting back on if you're on a traditional schedule. So time is a premium for sure.
Yeah, 2 weeks. Yeah, summer vacation is my it is a crunch time. Like both Rover and Spec or all three Rover and Spec books. I mean, I work on them all. I work on stuff throughout the year. Um, but I think they were all due. The final illustrations were all due. I think like late September. So I had like summer was when I was in the chair for many hours
Hmm.
getting the final
Hmm.
illustrations done.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if I'm a listener, you mentioned you were at a library today. If I'm a listener and I want to contact you or follow the work and possibly have you for a school visit or a talk or something like that, where would I go to connect in that way?
Well, just go to jonathan-roth.com. And, it's the contact page there. So just write me or find me on Instagram at JON Roth Books at John Roth Books. But yeah, I love to do school visits. I mean, I'm a school teacher by day and
Mhm.
obviously school, but as of a couple of years ago, I stopped working full time. I just finished my 25th year, like as a public school educator,
Congratulations. Congratulations.
but I have gone down to 4 days. So now, luckily, with art, it's a little more flexible because I have a really big school and we have like more than one art teacher.
Hmm.
Um, so on Wednesdays now, I kind of dedicate toward book stuff and also going to other schools, at least schools I can make it to in a day and back, usually DC, Maryland, Virginia kind of areas, or on Zoom. So yeah, I love to do school talks. A lot of science and STEAM tie-ins and all that kind of stuff.
Awesome, awesome. Well, have we missed anything in the second chat that you'd like to make sure to mention before we close out?
Oh, one more place. So I mentioned the Air and
Hmm.
Space Museum. So the launch for Almost Underwear, usually I launch. launch books, meaning like, the first public signing. Like books come out, as you know, on a Tuesday, which is
Hmm.
kind of weird because that's just like movies come out on Friday because audience, but I don't know, bookstores. Do you know where that tradition started? I assume
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I know some comics follow that pattern now too.
it must be a stocking thing. Like, it's a slow day, so maybe it gets people in the store or something. That's
Hmm.
maybe
Hmm.
not competing with movies. I don't know what the tradition is, but most traditional books at least have a release date on a Tuesday. Um, but then we like to have like what's called a launch event, meaning a signing at a bookstore or library or something. So in the case of this, I'm actually going to be signing at both Air and Space Museums, like the one in
Nice.
DC, like literally just across from where the Neil Armstrong cloth and the actual Wright Flyer uh, are located, like right across. Like I can see them from the store where I'll be outside signing. So it's kind of a
Cool.
bucket list thing come true to sign at Air and Space. And then there's another Air and Space Museum in Virginia by Dulles Airport, um, in like a giant old airplane hangar or whatever. They have an actual space shuttle there, all kinds of cool stuff. So I'll be doing a signing there. So if any of your listeners are in the DC area, August 24th and 25th, come on by.
Sounds great. Sounds great. And I'll make sure to share this before then. And Jonathan, glad to have you back anytime to talk about the projects that are on the way, and glad to feature you anytime.
All right. Well, thanks for all you do for books and comics. And it was great being with you again.
Great to have you. Great to have you. Thanks so much.